Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS and welcome back to my hotel room in this self-imposed exile while I'm away for work. Because my work involves a lot of travelling at the moment, it means I can spend a lot of time listening to Big Finish audio adventures, and the first one I dove into on my work trip was the Sixth Doctor Adventures, The Cosmos and Mrs. Clark. In this box set, which has a trilogy of stories, we have adventures starring Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor and Miranda Raisin as companion Constance Clark. For those of you who don't know, Constance Clark is a Big Finish exclusive companion. She's a mathematician from the 1940s who worked in Bletchley Park, which is the place where Alan Turing and his group broke the Enigma code. And there's basically two eras of Constance Clark in the TARDIS. There's the solo adventures with the Sixth Doctor and Constance, and then there's further adventures with the Sixth Doctor, Constance, and another companion called Flip. The Doctor, Constance, and Flip we met last year in the Quinn Dilemma box set, and now this year in the Cosmos and Mrs. Clark, it's the Sixth Doctor and Constance, just those two travelling. And as Colin Baker would describe it, the Doctor and Constance are not a Doctor-companion relationship, it's two friends travelling through time and space. And in this box set we have three stories. We have The Story Demon by Julian Richards, The Key to Many Worlds by Paul Mars, and Inconstancy by Ian Potter. Three wildly different stories in terms of tone and approach, and I really appreciate a box set that does that. For The Story Demon, the Doctor and Constance land on an unnamed forest world, and there's a society of human settlers there who have built their infrastructure, who have built their buildings through the crashed wreckage of spaceships, which I thought was a really great idea, a really great concept, and it's something that the Doctor is able to fanboy over. However, one of the spaceships is a Dalek spaceship, and the settlers have essentially taken the Dalek casing and have taken its voice box and are now using the Dalek tank as a way to tell stories to the children. And folks who have never known horror, like Nicholas Briggs as the Daleks, reading Macbeth. However, outside of the village are these huge creatures called the Burnermen, and they try and attack the village, and whenever one of them attacks, even though they don't get inside of the village because there are walls, there are fortifications, someone inside of the village still dies. So the Doctor and Constance have to figure out what's happening with these deaths, who are the Burnermen outside, and is the Story Demon really so innocent? Of course it's not, it's a bloody Dalek.
The Queen's screams echoed around the room. The other keys were caught in the blast and also exploded, one after another. Snow White huddled in the corner of the room where she had been flung, sheltering her face from the flying debris with her arms. As the smoke cleared and the flames...
That's a Dalek!
Shh! She could see the crouched forms of the seven...
I did say to be quiet.
Who had taken
She
refuge.
did, Doctor.
But it's a Dalek!
In the other corners
Broken,
of the
dissected,
room,
and empty
and
one,
beneath
which is
the
telling stories to
doomsday
children.
But it's a Dalek!
Snow White
Birch,
slowly
you're back.
got to her.
We'd better go back outside.
And the mind
Wyatt, come on.
over to her. She smiled down at the men who had helped her to save winter once again.
So that's your story, Demon.
Hoekstra says they made it from the wreckage of one of the demons the battle was fought against up there.
And you let it tell stories to children?
It's empty. Harmless.
Daleks are never harmless.
I think Julian Richards' script is really strong in terms of the fundamentals. It splits up the Doctor and Constance. Constance, having met the Daleks in a prior adventure, is already clued up on them. The Doctor sneaks outside of the village to try and locate the Burnermen, with the help of one of the young villagers, Birch, played by Carly Day. While Constance does some infiltrating, tries to figure out what's happening with the Story Demon, with the help of the village elder, Hoekstra, played by Cameron Johnson. I think the first half is really strong. The mystery of how the people are dying despite the Burnermen not getting inside of the village. It's a compelling mystery, and the way how the Story Demon subplot and the Burnerman subplot, how they complement each other in terms of like the logistics of it. I thought it was a really interesting way that the story unfolded. Like, it's a genuinely interesting locked door thriller, and then once the story plays its hand and reveals how the Burnermen are linked to the deaths, I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. However, I do take issue with one pretty big element of the Story Demon, and it's not actually in terms of how it's executed in the story, it's actually an ideological issue that I have. And it's because Julian Richards is expanding on the idea from Stephen Moffat in 2015 in The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, that the Daleks are actually more manipulated by their casings than you'd think at a first glance. The Story Demon continues the characterization that the Daleks inside of the casing, they don't really have a say in what's going on. And that the Dalek itself, the thing to really fear, is the tank. And I'm sorry, it's just an ideological preference. I just don't like that interpretation of the Daleks. The Third Doctor once said that the Daleks are a bubbling lump of hate. And that is the Dalek. The tank is just an extension of that. It's an armament that allows them to externalize that hate. Whereas if the Dalek or the occupant of the Dalek casing says, "I love you," the casing takes control and says exterminate and starts firing the weapon. I think it robs the mutant of the autonomy that makes them ideologically scary. Even in terms of just the language, like if you're inside of the Dalek casing and you're like, "Oh, I'm blind, I can't see," the casing will then vocalize it as "my vision is impaired, I cannot see." And I think that approach really hinders the great character work that has been done with the Daleks by writers like Terry Nation, David Whittaker, and even Chris Chibnall. And I don't say even Chris Chibnall as in, "Oh, Chris Chibnall is in that list of great Dalek writers." I think he is, because those Dalek mutants are so well characterized in his stories. But putting aside my personal preference, my ideological preference, if you can call it that, to one side, I think that the Story Demon is significantly better than stories like The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, because the elements surrounding that characterization of the Daleks, and should I say the characterization of the Dalek tank itself, I think the elements outside of that are significantly better. The cast are more well defined. The world building, despite not knowing the name of this planet, I think is really fascinating, including like the identity of the Burnham themselves and how they're even linked to the Doctor and Constance when they arrive. I thought really great ideas. And also Julian Richards, while I think he does sort of write himself into a corner with that ideological approach to the Daleks, he does also still characterize the Dalek mutants as bubbling lumps of hate. So you kind of get both, but I just don't like this approach to the Daleks, and this is a personal preference. I don't want to say that this story or this box set is a write-off because of it. I'm just letting you know what you're getting yourselves into. If you take this story in totality and just remove that aspect of the story Demon's great. Really interesting and intriguing first half with great world building, and a second half with some real tragedy to it. And Nicholas Briggs voicing the Dalek in this story, reading these stories to children, and it just blurts out these random lines based on who's nearest. That's a really creepy premise, and the imagery is really affecting. Great idea, and for the most part with the Story Demon, great execution. It's just asking me personally, Julian Richards, why do you put me in this situation? Is asking me to swallow one massive bitter pill. And I've got to be honest about that. But hey, maybe the Cosmos and Mrs. Clark box set is a box set about compromises, because I kind of feel a bit similarly to the next story, The Key to Many Worlds by Paul Mars. The Doctor and Constance land in 13th century Baghdad, and the Sixth Doctor is hoping to pay a visit to an old friend, Marco Polo. I didn't know going into this box set that we would be getting a sequel to the 1964 epic, one of my favourite First Doctor stories, Marco Polo. Marco Polo was played by Mark Eden in the 1960s, but here he's played by Terry Malloy. Marco Polo is much older, he's a lot more bitter. He's also found a new best friend in Tonio, played by Anthony Townsend. And Marco Polo is about to retire his days of voyaging the world. He's going to go to Venice one last time. And during his big leaving do, during a big party before he's about to leave, he has an enchantress brought onto the stage to entertain his guests. But the Sixth Doctor recognises who this enchantress is, and it's Iris Wildthyme, played by Katie Manning. And Iris Wildthyme, due to some weird, strange cosmic machinations, is able to swap bodies with the Doctor, meaning that Katie Manning is playing the Sixth Doctor and Colin Baker is playing Iris Wildthyme. Marco and Tonio, they don't believe what's going on. They have Iris in chains, and they all join in on this new adventure to Venice. They form a new caravan with the TARDIS, the Blue Box, and Iris Wildthyme's double-decker bus. And Constance is the only one to believe the Doctor and has to try and find a way to convince Marco Polo to give them the magical equipment needed to swap bodies again.
My friends, please, a big round of applause for that trans-temporal enchantress and wanted criminal, Iris Wildthyme. Yes, that'll be the last time anyone sees her performing anywhere for quite some time. What was that supposed to be? That was a rubbish trick.
What? What are you talking about? I wasn't responsible for that. Oh, I feel sick.
Doctor, are you all right?
Flaming Nora.
I think we'd best get him to a room as well, so he can have a lie down.
Oh,
I do feel peculiar. I feel quite different all over. Oh, am I feeling myself? Oh, am I feeling myself? Oh, behave yourself.
The Key to Many Worlds is a fascinating tightrope that I don't fully know if Paul Mars manages to pull off successfully. It wants to simultaneously be a sequel to Marco Polo, which was an epic 7-part adventure in the 1960s, and it wants to do that in just an hour's runtime. But it also wants to be a body swap sort of comedy with the Sixth Doctor and Iris Wildtime, and I don't think those two elements fully cohere. Much like Marco Polo, The Key to Many Worlds takes place over the span of several weeks and several months. This is the 13th century, you can't just hop on an EasyJet and go from Baghdad to Venice. But because The Key to Many Worlds is only like an hour long, you spend the first act, the first 15-20 minutes introducing the Doctor and Marco Polo again, and then introducing Iris Wildtime, then doing the body swap, and then it just doesn't leave enough time left on the table to actually explore the journey that they're making their way through to Venice. There's a lot of scenes where it's like, oh, remember back then when we had to do this adventure? And it's like, you could get like a full-blown box set out of the adventures of Marco Polo, the Sixth Doctor, Iris, and Constance making their way from Baghdad to Venice. I'd love to see that box set, but in just 1 hour story, it just leaves so much like dramatic potential, it leaves so many story possibilities and character work just unexplored. And the massive time jumps means that we never really see the progression of characters, we never really see the progression of these relationships develop. For example, later on in the journey, Marco Polo has a really nice scene with Constance, and Marco is like, you remind me of the Doctor's other friend Barbara. And that would have been a really nice, like, 5-minute dialogue scene to really flesh out this dynamic, but it never really happens. Iris initially seems to be absolutely thrilled that she's in the body of the Sixth Doctor and is able to get one over on her big rival, but then all of a sudden the Doctor and Iris body swapped. They turn up to Marco's tent one day and are just like, fed up with this, can we swap back please? And it's like, how did you get from A to B? I'm sounding way more negative than I need to, because it's fine, the drama work is serviceable, but I just feel like it's telling too big of a story, it's telling too many stories in just 1 hour of runtime, and then when they actually turn up to Venice, really nice scenes, and I do love the work that Terry Molloy does as Marco Polo, but it does feel very rushed. And as somebody who has never listened to an Iris Wildtime box set before, who has never listened to any of her stories, this is genuinely my proper introduction to the character. Yeah, Katie Manning's a lot of fun, Colin Baker is a lot of fun as Iris Wildtime as well, because like I said, it's a body swap. But if it was up to me, I would just prefer the Marco Polo sequel. If I had to choose one of those two elements, the body swap of the Doctor and Iris or the Marco Polo sequel, I'm afraid I'm choosing the latter. Marco Polo in the 1960s was like a nearly 2.5 hour story, and then now they're trying to tell two different stories, two almost competing, conflicting stories in like an hour's time. I will say though, there's some really wonderful scenes between Terry Molloy and Anthony Townsend. Anthony was a former contributor to Doctor Who magazine, massive Doctor Who personality. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2022. This box set was recorded in late 2021. So this is a posthumous role for Anthony, but the two work together really, really well. But I just kind of wish that they had more scenes together. They had more time to develop a relationship over the course of this journey to Venice. The Key to Many Worlds is not a bad story, far from it. I just think it leaves too many great elements on the table because it's constrained itself by format and it's constrained itself by runtime. Like I said, I think you could get a full box set's worth of stories from this premise, but no, we have to also add in Iris Wildtime and you're making it only an hour. And that, unfortunately, is the silver bullet for this story. And lastly, in this box set, we have Inconstancy by Ian Potter. The Doctor and Constance land on the world of Hoy, and it's a highly regulated colony world. You've got Claudia, who's the governor, played by Vivian Rochester, and while Constance manages to escape from the regulators on the planet, the Doctor winds up kidnapped and has to be reprogrammed. Whilst hiding, Constance finds a strange protean creature in the vents, this strange amorphous being that craves purpose and craves identity, and decides to use Constance as a template. And because Constance really wants to rescue the Sixth Doctor, it means that that's what the protean wants to do, so it starts basically cloning itself into an army of very angry Constances. All the while, this story is framed by dual narration. You have the Sixth Doctor who's telling this story to a stranger on a park bench, while Constance is also relaying her side of the story to a character called the Sky Teller, who's this sort of soothsayer character.
District E9 work units. Remain in holding court until further notice. Home District is undergoing regulatory sweeps and is a restricted access zone. Refreshments and comfort facilities will be assigned.
We're tired. We just want home.
An armored figure stepped forward with a device in its gauntlet. There was a piercing squeal and a bone-rattling crunch. Then the complainant collapsed.
Unauthorized engagement. Precautionary subjection. Remain calm. Disruptor will be taken for assessment.
It was an awful spectacle. I wanted to protest, of course, but if that was the penalty for even mild dissent, I knew it wasn't wise.
District G12 work units, step to left.
The doctor joined the workers, stepping to one side, and I naturally followed suit.
Inconstancy is a strange one. I really admire what it's going for, the idea of identity, the idea of purpose, and also I respect Ian Potter's mission statement of how can I have a totalitarian regime that the Doctor and Constance have to take down, but with like a handful of characters. And I think the framing device of the Dawn narration allows the Doctor and Constance to tell the story from their own unique emotional perspectives as they are separated. It also means that their narration can sort of fill in the gaps. And I also really loved the framing device's utility in having this be a story that the Doctor and Constance are retelling after the fact and they're evaluating what they learned on the journey. I think that's a really great idea, and I think that Colin Baker and Miranda Raisin, performance-wise, they run with that material, particularly Miranda. This is like her best performance in the box set. She's brilliant in this story. But the actual story itself, the nuts and bolts of the A-plot, I thought were a little bit lackluster. Particularly the character of Claudia, who is the main antagonistic threat, and it's a shame because just as the story's about to get resolved and it's going to be tied up in a neat little bow, Claudia just decides, oh no, I'm the villain and the story needs to run for another 20 minutes, so I'm just going to do something massively out of character. Like, I remember it happening when I was listening to this in the car and just thinking, oh god, big yawn. Now obviously people can be irrational, people can do things to prevent the story from wrapping up in a neat little bow, obviously, but it just felt very contrived. And I also think there may be some really weird subtext here where the world of Hoy is a socially distanced world, where people have to stay indoors unless they're going out for work, they have to be a certain amount of distance from each other, they're not allowed to make eye contact with people from different families. Then when you realise that this story was recorded in late 2021, so presumably written quite a bit before that, then you kind of think, is Ian Potter trying to write his way through COVID lockdowns? I don't know, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze the guy, I promise, but when you take the elements of the story and then combine that with when the story was written, that's kind of the main conclusion I get to. And trying to transplant a dictatorial fictional alien world with COVID lockdowns in the UK, I don't know, I don't think that they really gel together. The most interesting element is the protean creature that Constance befriends, for lack of a better term. It's a weird, complicated dynamic. And it's a fun extension of Constance's characterization, particularly in The Story Demon, where the Doctor keeps on wandering off and Constance is like an angry mother who's like, get here now, old sixy, you're in trouble because you keep wandering off. And it extends that to the Inconstance, which is what this creature calls itself when it meets Constance. And Mrs. Clark here is like an exasperated mother, or more akin to like a teacher on a school field trip trying to round up the rowdy kids. And that was a fun interpretation, and I think that the contrast as well from that to the really emotionally vulnerable and open Constance that we get in the framing device, really effective stuff, great performance. I think that framing device is what saves Inconstancy. I think without that framing device, this story is like half of what it is. But the Cosmos and Mrs. Clark as a box set, it's a thematically fascinating box set. I think it's dealing with some brilliant ideas, but maybe a few too many ideas, or the great ideas it has, it's struggling to like channel it into something more substantial. Like, I think that the parts are much more effective than the whole. I think the best and most complete story here is The Story Demon, and I think The Key to Many Worlds has the most potential by orders of magnitude. It's just struggling to really make its way to the surface, which is why, despite having some incredibly talented writers and some great performances and great production overall, The Cosmos and Mrs. Clark is a box set that I struggle to recommend. I think if you're really invested in the Sixth Doctor and Constance's relationship, then I think it's worth diving in. But if you don't know anything about this TARDIS team, if you're relatively new to the Sixth Doctor Adventures range, I think start elsewhere and maybe see if you want to dive into this later. I've been a really big fan of the Sixth Doctor Adventures range as I've been reviewing Big Finish over the past few years, and I think producer Jacqueline Rayner does a terrific job with the characterization, and she's a great spearhead for these box sets. But I think the Cosmos and Mrs. Clark is a rare miss. But that's my review of the Cosmos and Mrs. Clark from the Sixth Doctor Adventures. What did you folks think? If you've listened to the box set, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button because it really, really helps me out. And folks, I'll see you all next time.